Erev Tov. Good evening. Welcome. My name is Paul Cohen, and I have the privilege of serving here at Temple Jeremiah as Senior Rabbi. On behalf of Steve Kleiman, the president of our congregation, my colleagues, Rabbi Rachel Heaps, Daniel Glassman, Matt Rissian, we are so pleased to welcome Donniel and all of you to Temple Jeremiah. The Hartman Institute and the Federation, with whom we are partnering this evening, hold a very special place in my heart for lots and lots of different reasons, not the least of which is that Federation allowed for me to participate in an incredible program at the Shalom Hartman Institute, the Rabbinic Leadership Initiative. I was part of cohort number 5 of that, sponsored by the Jewish United Fund, the Federation here in Chicago. I have several friends and colleagues who have participated in that same program. Rabbi Sidney Helbron of Temple Bethel in Northbrook, Rabbi Ellen Weinberg-Dreyfus, who is retired and was part of the first cohort of the RLI, Rabbi Michael Weinberg, the emeritus of Temple Beth Israel in Skokie. It's always a challenge when you start to name names. I don't think there's anybody else, any other rabbis who have studied at Hartman yet that I've left out? Yeah, good. And we are especially pleased to welcome Congressman Brad Schneider, who is here also this evening. Thank you for being here with us. And again, to say a gigantic thank you to Federation, who partners with us not only in presenting this program, but partners with us in the incredible work that we do here in the greater Chicago area and around the world, and today especially in Israel. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Lonnie Nassiter, who is the CEO and president of the Federation here in Chicago, to continue with introductions. Lonnie, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Paul. I appreciate it. It's great to be back at Jeremiah. I've not been here in a while. For those of you that are members of this show, it is a great place. I spent many simchas here, celebrating friends, really kind of lifetime events, and it's great to be back. And to have my friend Donniel in town, when I was offered the opportunity to host or be a part of this, I immediately said, sure, when, how can we do this? Because it is a treat. I was asked to just talk a little bit about just our community in the last 6 months. I think all of us have been, unfortunately, living by the news, waking up in the middle of the night, especially the first couple of weeks, and maybe even now for many of you, just beholden to what's happening and feeling and sympathizing and empathizing and utzing and all the rest, all the other adjectives that describe the last 6 months. True to form, as Paul was saying, thank goodness we have a strong Jewish community here in a federation that has always stepped up when the challenge presents itself, and this is no different. When, in fact, we got word of what was happening in Israel, we have the luxury and fortune, I'm sure many of you are able to get some of the daily briefings by my colleague Ofer Bavli in Jerusalem, who has been doing just an unbelievable job since this happened. But we had the opportunity, because we're unique, we're a federation that has significant resources and depth and experience, that we were able to say, all right, what can our Chicago response be to help the people of Israel? And so within 24 hours, we opened up an emergency fund. To this day, as of literally this morning, we are over $52 million that our amazing community in Chicago has raised. It really is a testament to the giving nature and that long-time commitment that we have had to the state of Israel. 29 million of the 52 has already gone out the door, primarily going to people that were the victims of October 7th. Now, unfortunately, the soldiers' families, significant resources going towards trauma care, and a lot of resources, especially at the beginning, were going towards relocation, where, as we know, hundreds of thousands from both the south and the north were forced to leave their homes and basically start a new life in different parts of Israel. And unfortunately, which I'm sure we'll probably talk about, the government was in no position to probably do the job they needed to do, and thank goodness North America and the Chicago Jewish community has stepped in. We also have really kind of taken a real interest in one of those communities near Oz in the Gaza envelope. We've made a $5 million commitment, and probably even more in the next couple of years, to really figure out a way to get that kibbutz back up and running. And so whenever you decide to go to Israel, whenever that may be, please reach out to us and we'll make sure that you make that connection. There will always be that Chicago historical tie to this amazing community that unfortunately a quarter of their people were either killed or held hostage on October 7th. So, and our community also mobilized in terms of just our advocacy. Over 3,000 Chicagoans either took a plane or a train or drove to D.C. in that November rally. I know Congressman Schneider was, of course, there, and many of you in the room, too, and Chicago Federation made it possible to subsidize all the different day schools and different community groups that wanted to go, and we made our presence felt. And all I could think of as I was sitting there watching 300,000 Jews sitting on the steps of Washington was how the world may have been different and world history may have been different if we were able to mobilize in the 30s. And if we were able to go up and have 300,000 Jews in the 30s go to FDR and appeal of what was happening in Europe and all the rest. And that's part of the positives tonight. And I'm sure Donniel and Claire will talk a little bit about some of the things that give us real pause and make us angst a little bit. But there's some silver linings, and that's one of them, is this community isn't the Shah community anymore. We're not quiet. We're vocal, we advocate, we put our money where our mouth is, we have relationships, and we haven't been afraid to leverage those as well. Missions, we've probably done 7 already just in the last couple of weeks. We have one right now, a women's mission that are going. We continue to do volunteer missions, so people that want to experience Israel, give back, and all the rest. JUF has assembled those, and so many other organizations from JNF and others have also given opportunities for our community to engage and just give a hug to Israelis. And Donniel and I were talking at lunch today, is there something very powerful right now about just going over there and giving them a hug. They are feeling a little bit isolated, they're feeling vulnerable, they're still in trauma, and for us to be able to say, we got your back, we're here for you, is very profound and very important as well. Our events, no matter what events we do, it just feels like we're getting double, triple, sometimes even 4x what we've been used to in other parts of the year, which really is, I think, reflective of a community that cares deeply and wants to be together. That is what I have also garnered in the last couple months, that people feel the need, like tonight, let's be together, let's talk about tough topics, but it's really kind of difficult to be in your home or on your computer. You need this kind of connection, and thank God we're kind of moved past the COVID era, and we're okay. Also, we were really encouraged by all of our different engagement opportunities, from young leaders at our base Hillels, where we have 5 right now. We're having literally through-the-roof attendance on Shabbats right now. Our Hillels, and I see Michael Simon at Northwestern here today, he will tell you that the amount of students that are really coming out of the woodworks is amazing. They're leaning into their Judaism. And I can tell you anecdotally, so many families in Chicago who are kind of on the sidelines October 6th have come to us and said, all right, I understand what's at stake here. I need to lean into my identity. I need to lean into my Judaism. How can I help? What can I do? And I think that's reflective. In fact, of the $52 million, over half of the donors to that $52 million fund were first-time givers to JUF. First-time givers. So it gives you an indication of the fact that this has really gotten people to wake up a little bit, and it's the confluence, and they mentioned this in the podcast, of the fact that I think both communities are feeling vulnerable at the same time. And so that confluence of real kind of concern has gotten people to stand up and speak out. So, and the last thing is just our voice. Our voice is important right now. We have been really hitting hard the hostage situation from day one, whether it be mobile trucks, which we've had in the loop for the last 5-6 months, to 15 to 16 billboards all throughout Chicagoland. We recognized early on that to get into politics in '67 and territory was not the way to go with Americans. Let's talk about the hostages. I think your average American understands the role that we can play in getting those hostages home, and Americans understand the unsettling nature of a community that has hundreds of their people displaced and taken from their homes innocently and drawn to the tunnels of Gaza. So I feel like this particular session couldn't come at a better time in terms of us having an opportunity at a moment where I think our community, by and large, is as galvanized and together as I've ever seen in my 20 years of professional life. Now, granted, the last week or two has actually, we're starting to see things fray a little bit, and understandably so. It's a complex situation, but to have Donniel and to have Claire tonight kind of help us unpack a little bit and talk about it is the true nature of what Hartman does. It's the reason why JUF has invested so many years in the Institute. And before I turn it over to my two esteemed colleagues, I do want to mention one big plug, and that's those of you that have been listening to For Heaven's Sake since October 7th. I have been listening. I don't think I've missed one, and it has become a part of my routine. I just can't wait for that. You don't really, by the way, you're not really good at telling us when you're dropping these things, so you got to keep on going to your phone and saying, all right, when is it coming? But what's so great about it is you have two unbelievably wise, passionate, and emotional men, really kind of figuring out how they're dealing with many different issues, how they're feeling, not disqualifying each other's emotions, but leaning into each other's emotions. And it has been almost like having a friend at my dinner table or breakfast table for the last 6 months. I look forward to it. Even when I saw Donniel today and I just heard his voice, it just brought me back to, and you're going to hear it now, those of you that listen, but it has been a real treat and a real service for us in the diaspora to be able to get that every 3-4 days. It really has been. So with that, Donniel Hartman, no introduction, but an author, a rabbi, heading Shalom Hartman Institute, a friend, and somebody that really is a clear Jewish thinker and clear Jewish leader. And then we're so lucky that we have someone as esteemed as Claire Sufrin, too, Dr. Claire Sufrin, who is also in her own right an esteemed writer, and she is the senior editor at the Hartman Institute as well. So we're going to kick it off to them. They're going to have a robust discussion. I'm assuming we'll have time for Q&A as well. But with that, I want to turn it over to Claire and Donniel. Thank you.
Are these on? It's on? Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Lonnie, for the introductions and for sharing the big picture of what's been going on in the Chicago community from day to day. It's easy to lose track of that big picture, so I really appreciate it. Donniel, welcome.
Thank you.
It's, are you on? Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, it's wonderful to have you here. And I recently finished your new book, which is what we're here to discuss, Who Are the Jews and Who Can We Become? And I want to draw out from you some of the most important parts of the book so that we can share them with the audience and also in that way give a sense of what we do at the Institute and the ways that we think about things and approach new questions. So with that as background, I wanted to invite you to describe the two covenants that you see as defining the Jewish people, the Genesis covenant on the one hand and the Exodus covenant on the other.
Hi, good evening, everyone. The two covenants are two different parts of my soul. One part of my soul is understanding that Judaism and that my religious life involves a deep loyalty and connection to my people. And that I wouldn't be a Jew, not in a national sense, I wouldn't be a Jew religiously if it wasn't for my people. I wouldn't. That's my deep love and my deep sense of self. I belong to a people who've been walking together for 4,000 years. It's a very powerful feeling. And it shapes me and defines me and obligates me. And the other part of who I am is a belief that as a Jew, I am obligated to be exemplary. I'm obligated to stand for something. I'm obligated to obligate myself, to not look to the left or to the right at what the world does, but to ask, what is the best of humanity? And how does that shape who you are? And those are two different parts of my soul. And they don't always live at peace with each other. But they're a deep part of what being a Jew is. And in the process of this book, writing this book for 15 years, and teaching tens of thousands of Jews across America and testing it, including a lot of my friends here tonight from Eitz Chaim. I think you might have been one of the first groups that I started to test this idea on. 15 years ago, you wouldn't remember, but I do. I think you were the first ones to hear the words Genesis Jews and Exodus Jews a lifetime ago. I discovered that in our tradition, there are actually two very different covenants that God makes with the Jewish people. One is the covenant, what I call the covenant of being, and the other one is the covenant of becoming. The covenant of being starts in the book of Genesis, in which we are welcomed by God, loved by God, accepted by God, simply by virtue of the fact that we are Abraham's descendants. Nothing more. We don't have to do anything at all. Nothing. That God is saying that to be Jewish is who you are, and I'm going to walk with you. Like a loving parent who loves their kids unconditionally. I love my kids unconditionally. I'm all in. And I've told them, doesn't matter what you do. Doesn't matter what problems you get yourself into. My loyalty and commitment to you is eternal and unquestionable. As some of you also know, with one exception, that they don't drive a motorcycle. Everybody has boundaries. I've told you that, you know, and it's true. And what does it do to somebody when you're simply loved and accepted? And in this Judaism, there is no good Jews or bad Jews. There's no such thing. There's just a Jew. Now, you could have all your beliefs and you could have all your practices, but they're secondary to the fact that I accept you and love you, just like we do to our kids. Our kids aren't like us, and they're going to be different, but they're all part of the family. And this is a very deep part of Judaism as a religion. Deep part of Judaism as a religion, ultimately translated into Jewish law, is that a person who sins, an Israelite, even though you sin, is still an Israelite. There is nothing that you could do that removes you from this covenant. Nothing. It's a covenant of grace. And when you are loved, you flourish. And there's something very powerful in our tradition, which just turns to you and says, we love you and accept you. I don't care where you live, and I don't care what your denomination is, it just doesn't matter to me. All of that is small compared to a core sense of Jewishness. That Jewishness has God embracing all of us regardless of who we are, and therefore obligates us to embrace all Jews regardless of who they are. And if you, for example, could embrace Jacob's children, you certainly could embrace Jews of a different denomination than you. Jacob's children were obnoxious, disgusting people, truly disgusting, despicable people. Really. If they were my kids, that would challenge me. Because thank God none of my kids tried to kill their brother and sell them to Egypt. My greatest joy in life, every summer we go away, is just to see my kids, my adult children, talking with each other. Like, there's nothing, I don't have to be in the conversation. I just want to watch. Just watching them. It's like, there's nothing better than that in the world. Jacob's children? A God who stays with Jacob's children obligates you to stay with every single Jew regardless of who they are and what they believe. It's a very, very deep part of our tradition. And by the way, this is how Jews understood ourselves for 3-4. This is one of the stories we told ourselves about ourselves. That's why the evil child in the Haggadah, like, what makes somebody evil in our tradition? Like, what's the great heresy of Judaism? Not keeping kosher? Not going to this or that shul? What's the great heresy? Is when a person says, what is this worship to you? To you and not to them. Since they have separated themselves from the Jewish people, they are a heretic in the essence. Lonnie, that's federation. That's what it's like. You don't pick. You just get up in the morning and say, who are the people here? They're my people. You are the antithesis of the evil child. That's the only thing you don't tolerate, is the person who says, I want to have no part of this people. And that for us is the heresy in the essence, because that's a heresy of the Genesis covenant. If God tolerates, you have to tolerate. If God is loyal, you have to be loyal. And for 4,000 years, that's the way Jews acted. When a Jew is in trouble, we don't sleep. But not just that, we see each other and are connected to each other in a very, very deep way, which has nothing to do with what we believe and nothing to do with what we do. That I discovered in Genesis. But the Bible is not just Genesis. When you get through Genesis, and by the way, the Exodus from Egypt is still Genesis Jews. They don't talk about Jews doing things and Jews. It has nothing to do with being righteous, simply because you're part of this family. And just to open up a little footnote, that family was never a race. In the Bible, you could marry into the family. Intermarriage was allowed. Later, conversion is allowed. So it was not, it's a mythic story of a deep connection, not just to each other, but our connection to each other is the byproduct of God's connection to us. And that's part of our religion. But the second part is introduced in Exodus 19, where God says to the Jewish people, I want something of you. I want you to listen to what I have to say to you. I want you to obey. Because what I really want from you is I don't only want you to be a Jew and to be in relationship to me. I want you to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Kingdom of priests and a holy nation. I want of you excellence. I want of you aspirations. I want you to demand something of yourself. Judaism, just like every religion, the greatest sin is to be mediocre. I want something of you. Now, under Exodus, there's good Jews and bad Jews. There's people who keep more and people who keep less. Exodus is a corrective to Genesis being mediocre. But Genesis is a corrective to Exodus, which could breed divisiveness, judgmentalism, a notion that to be a Jew is to be a part of my shul, not to be part of my community. It's to be a part of my political vision or my religious ideology. And so these two covenants exist, and in our tradition, they're never supposed to separate from each other. They're supposed to talk to each other and live with each other and challenge each other. One is the covenant of being, and one is the covenant of becoming. That your responsibility is to become something. But don't become something, don't have aspirations, and therefore judge those Jews who don't aspire like you do. That's the corrective of Genesis. And don't embrace Jews simply because of who they are, without also demanding something of them. And maybe they won't agree with you, but it doesn't mean you can't demand. And the journey of the Jewish people for the last 4,000 years, and this is the story we have told ourselves about ourselves, is that to be a Jew is to embrace both a covenant of being and a covenant of becoming. And we might have different covenants of becoming, but what has to unite all of us is that I have to be exceptional. I have to walk in the world and make a difference. I have to stand for moral, spiritual excellence. How the two relate to each other is the essence of these two covenants.
Thank you. So the book was originally supposed to come out last November, and this tour that you've been able to take around the country and in Canada as well was supposed to be last fall. And it invites, I think, all of us to ask the question of what might you have added to the book if you were writing it now, after October 7th, or I'll let you approach it from the other side. In what ways has October 7th challenged the two covenants and how you think about them, or how have the two covenants helped you to respond to October 7th? You could go in either direction, or perhaps both.
I'll pick one for now, and then you could. These two covenants have been living with me throughout the war in Gaza. Because the war in Gaza activates a very strong Genesis covenant. And again, Lonnie, when you said how much the community stood up, they were being Genesis Jews. They just said, my people are in trouble, my loyalty and commitment to my community. And this war has activated constant demands of loyalty from all of you and from me. How do I serve my people? What do my people need? How do I understand them and help them at a time of profound crisis? But at the same time, I'm also an Exodus Jew. And Exodus says, not only how do I defend and stand with the people, what are the expectations that I have of Israel? Genesis tells me to stand with Israel. Exodus tells me that to be a lover of Israel is to expect things from Israel. Now, war is a very difficult time because what makes it so difficult is it's not natural. It's like you're traumatized, you hunker down. When there's fear, by definition, your horizons shift and end up square in your belly button. That's where they end up. Like you look and you just see yourself because like you have so many things that are wrong, like you don't have room. And this war, these two categories, which I've been walking with now for 15 years and have been very meaningful to me personally as I've thought about them and improved them and refined them, have been there with me. And what are the demands of Genesis and what are the demands of Exodus? And I'll quote my chavruta, my friend for, 30, Mark, when did we first meet each other? 30 years ago. Mark very astutely, he said to me, Donniel, I was reading your categories. Is there a challenge? He didn't put it as a question, but I'm going to put it as a question. Is there a challenge that we want to be Exodus Jews? We want to fulfill our Genesis command obligations, and then by definition, be perceived as excellent Exodus Jews. They're not the same. And a love for Israel and a love for the Jewish people requires both covenants. In my podcast, I speak about the difference between fighting a just war and fighting a just war justly. A just war is both a Genesis and Exodus obligation. I have a right to defend myself. I have a right to live. I have a right for my citizens to feel safe. And if you take that away, I, just like every country in the world, both my loyalty to my people and my right, inalienable right to live, doesn't give me a right, obligates me to defend myself. That's a just war. And I fight a just war because it's a war of self-defense, because I believe that all human beings are created in the image of God, also includes who? Me. Hello? Me too. I have a right to be. Genesis and Exodus obligated Israel to go to war in what I believe is one of the most just wars that I could remember in decades, maybe even more than that. It's one of the no-brainer wars in morality of war. Like in any theory of just war, this is the most simple of wars. A war against a murderous organization who not only said that they want to destroy us, but actually tried and killed and said, I want to do it again. So that's, Exodus and Genesis require of me to go to war. But Exodus asks, how do I fight a just war justly? Exodus doesn't let you say, I come first, second, third, and fourth, and my survival is all that counts. Exodus says that you have an inalienable right, but so do all human beings. And when you go to war, you're encountering an enemy, but also human beings. So what does it mean to fight this war? How do we fight it? What do we do? And so for months now, I've been hunted, Claire. I've literally been hunted by these questions. And also by an Israeli society that's having difficulty making room for Exodus in their life right now. They're having difficulty doing it. It's hard for them. They're in a traumatized Genesis consciousness. And I know that whenever one of the covenants becomes too dominant, something flawed happens to us as a people. Something wrong happens to us. And one of our great challenges is not how are you an Exodus Jew when life is good. Exodus is not just about how you distribute the bounty and the plenitude that you have. Your Exodus commitments come to fore when it's hard, when you're scared. That's when it's tested. And so for months now, I've been applying and thinking, where do we go? And what does Exodus demand? And how do I fulfill Exodus obligations without denying my Genesis obligations? And so that's been there.
Thank you. One of the things that I really enjoyed about the book is you drop in a few moments from your life, moments when things became crystallized for you. And I wanted to invite you to share a little bit of those sorts of reflections, moments you've lived both in Israel and in North America at key points in your life.
The whole book does that.
I know.
Could you be more
Could I
specific?
be more specific? So
Because
I want the stories that didn't make it into the book.
Hartman were emotional exhibitionists, and so in the book it's both a journey of my learning, and it's a journey like all of us. What we think and what we know is always an intersection of our lives.
All right.
It's just the way we all. What we know is what we've experienced.
So I'll be more specific. You write in the book about leaving Israel after the Lebanon War, but you didn't write about your choice to leave New Jersey and go back to Israel.
Right.
And I'm curious about what pulled you back as somebody who could live in either side of the divide.
Yeah. After the war in Lebanon, I had to leave. Back then, one of the advantages of living in Israel in the 80s is that boys didn't have feelings. So you were always okay, and you didn't know when you weren't okay. But somewhere inside, you might have known something. And I just seemed to have had a problem breathing in Israel. It wasn't PTSD, because we didn't have feelings, and it wasn't a D, but after the war, which was a terrible, terrible war for me personally and for my family, and as some of you know, there's no reason in the world that I should be alive today. When my tank was blown, there's no reason in the world that I should be breathing right now. And that was a war which had an Exodus context or pretext, and I fought a part of that war that had no Exodus justifications. It wasn't a war of self-defense. Our unit was lied to. We were part of Sharon's secret war to set up a new order in Lebanon. And after the war, I just couldn't breathe. I had literally difficulty breathing, and I finished my BA, finished my rabbinic ordination, took 2 more years, and I ran. Like I was Like, you ever get that feeling when you're in a pool and you're holding your breath, like you're trying, and then I just needed to breathe. And I went to the United States to breathe. And the minute I came here, life had changed. And I was able to breathe, and I started a very beautiful part of my life. But being in Israel was always my calling. It was also what I was told to call. I was raised that way. And but Israel is such a deep part of my Genesis consciousness. I'm responsible for Israel. When you live in Israel, you're living in the midst of a society with a very deep Genesis sensibility, and it's inspiring. It feels at home. So like, even with all, and we can do all the bad news, and there's plenty of bad news, and there's plenty of divisiveness and hatred, there's still a core Genesis consciousness that permeates Israeli society. Very deep. But it took me about 7-8 years to be able to overcome the exodus, the feeling of betrayal on an exodus level. It was also a betrayal on a Genesis level. And but going back was always, I love America, and I could live in America. But the greatest honor in my life is to live in the midst of my people and to serve my people in Israel. It's home. But sometimes you can't breathe at home. So I just, and the minute I felt I could breathe, and Adina finished up some degrees, going back was self-evident. But one of my most important lessons of the war in Lebanon is that I have to talk about Israel's exodus responsibilities. And I always have to do that. And I know when Israel forgets its exodus responsibilities. And as a Genesis Jew, I am a teacher of Exodus, but it's always on the basis of Genesis. So going back was about bringing two parts of my soul together that were ruptured and that couldn't live with each other for a while. And maybe, coming to the United States and serving Jews, and I was a rabbi of a Jewish community center, and serving Jews of all denominations. And it put me back on track and enabled me to go back.
Thank you. I'm really moved as an American Jew by your descriptions of the strength of the Genesis covenant in Israel, and I feel it's something that we could all learn from Israeli Jews. And I'm curious, as someone, you've told me you've been in the US or in Canada 4 times in the last few months. What would you like to bring back with you from North American Jews to Israeli Jews or to Israeli society?
Thank you for that. We're not the same. And that's actually a strength. You're not supposed to be Israeli. You're not. Distance makes you see things very differently. So, just to give you this is the first war in Gaza that I didn't have, my son wasn't in Gaza. I want to tell you, I have friends, I have nephews, I have workers. When your kid is not in Gaza, it's a different war. It's not the same. When you're 6,000 to 10,000 miles away, as much of the Genesis-ness that you have, it's just not the same. It's not. You can't feel it. You don't have the terror that someone who has a child, a grandchild or a spouse or a parent in the war. Like, you don't have, my dear friend Yechiel Popko. Well, we've known each other for I don't know how many years. He has grandchildren in Gaza, and when you hear him talk, he's an Israeli. It's like, it's something completely different. You can't know what it is. That's not a flaw of yours. That's not something that, why can't? No, you can't. I'm in Israel, and the fact that it was my nephews and family and friends, and I went to over 10, 15 funerals of workers, and I have this worker who's 95, and I had to go to his grandson's funeral. Like, that's, it's just not right. No, maybe it was his great-grandchild's funeral. Like, it just doesn't. So now, the fact that you don't experience it, don't let anybody ever say that that's a flaw. It just is reality. And even in Israel, there were different circles. People whose children experience things one way. Now, that's just the reality of Jewish life. And so by definition, you're going to care and you're going to do what you can, but you're not going to have the same intensity that Israelis have. But that could also, in a healthy community, could be a gift. Because precisely because of your difference, you might be able to balance Genesis and Exodus in a different way. You might have room in your soul to ask questions that Israelis have to ask, but they can't. So in a healthy community, what we do is we learn from each other. My job is not to say to you, you're flawed Jews because you're not standing with Israel the way an Israeli does. That would be a waste. That would be a waste of an asset. I personally live in 3 communities. I'm an Israeli Jew. And the Genesis dimension is total. I am all in, regardless. I am just simply all in. But I'm also a member of the Jewish people worldwide. And I talk with you more than many of my Israeli colleagues. So I have another sphere of conversation that I hear. There's questions that you ask. The first place that I lectured where somebody asked me, what about Gazan civilian casualties, was in December. Here. In Bnei Jeshurun. Now in Israel, nobody's asking those questions. And by the way, still to today, they're almost never asking that question. It's just starting. So I could say, well, that's just a flaw. But you're a part of me. And I'm learning from you. I'm also an Israeli. And every Israeli citizen claims me. And a number of years ago, I began to understand this and started a huge initiative to develop new relationships between Israeli Jews and Israeli Arab Palestinians. And I have Israeli Arab Palestinians on my staff, on my teaching faculty, in my research center. My executive committee, which runs the whole Hartman Institute, has an Israeli Arab Palestinian who, when I hired her, she said to me, Donniel, you know I'm not a Zionist. And I said, if you were a Zionist, I wouldn't hire you. She also claims me. And her people are being killed in Gaza. Her people were also murdered on October 7th because she has, like you, dual loyalties. Not in a bad sense, in the best sense of the term. And I'm hearing about this war from her. Now, unfortunately, the Jewish community, some people in Israel say to you, shh, shut up, you don't know. Some Israeli Jews say to Israeli Palestinians, shh, loyalty test, are you with me? I don't want to hear about the fact that your family's being killed in Gaza. And so what we do is we silence people who disagree with us. I don't know how or why, but I've been blessed by the fact that I live and actually have 3 spheres of loyalty. And I would say to you, and as an Israeli, and I know a lot of Israelis won't say this to you, Israelis want you to give money and shut up. That's all they want you to do. They just want you to shut up. And they want you to have no feelings. Be 1970 Israeli men. You have no feelings. All you do is kill yourself, raise all the money, send it over, and shut up. But if we do that, we are losing one of our greatest assets. Because as Genesis Jews, we can learn from each other. And so, what have I learned? I've learned how important you are to Israel, not simply because of your support, that too. I want to tell you, October 7th made many Israelis feel frightened. And knowing that you were there with us was a deep source of comfort. And we knew that, listen, Biden is a good guy. He is. He has a deep, instinctive love for the Jewish people that goes back to his Catholic upbringing and to his family. It's like when you hear him say, why do I support the Jews? Don't you know their history? It's like the decent thing. He's really a good guy. I'm not telling you who to vote for. That's not my thing. If you would listen to me, but it doesn't matter. But he really is a good guy. But we also knew, and Lonnie, you were saying this today at lunch, we also knew. And Brad, you're like, no one has to teach you what it means. Like, you exemplify what love for Israel and loyalty to the Jewish people means, and how you balance that as being a loyal, loving American congressman. But we know that we are safe in America because of everything that you do. So that is critical. But it's when we could embrace the fact that we have things to learn from you. Not just the support that we need, but that precisely the distance gives you a perspective that we can't have right now. And I want to tell you, Israelis are hurting themselves. Right now, Israelis are hurting themselves. They want to be given, in Mark's language, the medal of Exodus without asking Exodus questions, because they don't have psychologically the room to do it, Mark. But they don't want to say, I'm failing Exodusly. No. I'm still the most moral people, everything is wonderful, but they don't want to ask those questions. And they can't. And part of what I realized, and I'm trying to figure out, because my whole life's work is to engage in this, is to also accept when people can't hear you right now. And that's okay too. When someone says to me in Israel, Donniel, I'm not proud of this, but right now I have no room in my heart to worry about Gazan civilians. I say to them, I could shout at them and say, shame on you. Or I could say, I understand you. I appreciate that as human beings, we could only do what we could do. But the saving grace is the fact that you said, I'm not proud of it. If you said I was proud of it, then I'd walk away from you. Because your Exodus, your Judaism has nothing to do. You don't share my core religious values. But if you say I'm not proud of it, then there's room. And your job, you have room in your heart. You do. And a smart Jewish world is one that doesn't do loyalty tests, but uses the fact that we have different experiences, and precisely because of that, we learn different things. We in Israel live in the biggest Jewish ghetto in Jewish history. You live in the midst of a society that was, despite the increase in anti-Semitism, still loves you. Still loves you. And you listen to them and you learn from them. Your news sources are different from our news sources. That's not a flaw. It's an opportunity. And what I've learned, it's been tiring, and I can't tell you how many airports I've been in. Like, do you remember that Tom Hanks movie? I had that feeling this week, because literally I was in 10 airports. And I'm walking, in each one, you don't just go on a plane. You're not on a plane. Before you're on a plane, you're in an airport. Forget the traffic beforehand. You're in an airport. You're going, you're checking in, and, I have my clear and my TS, the whole shebang. But I'm in the airport, and I'm walking along these corridors with the same stores, and each one, I was every day, almost every day I was in 2 airports. I sort of felt like, this is not normal. I'm sort of stuck in this bizarre place. But besides that, the unbelievable gift that I have to have Genesis Jews who love me and love me enough to ask Exodus questions. And my job is to get more and more Jews to realize the bracha of that situation.
Thank you. I would like to now give all of you a chance to ask some questions. We're going to take 3 questions, and then we will allow you to answer. So, okay. So we have some microphones coming around. It's always challenging to know who had their hand up first, but Natalie, I think right here in the middle, in the green shirt, kippah. Yes, I think you were first. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, are they on?
So, thank you for that. I was in Israel for the Yom Kippur War, studying with, among others, your father, but I was still an American Jew. But I came back from Israel a few days ago from a mission, both incredibly fulfilled and angry. And I think you've helped crystallize why. The incredibly fulfilled was all the different volunteer organizations doing things like food and wounded soldiers and all the rest of that. The angry was when I thought about it, it went to one thing you said, they just want the money, and I felt like an enabler. And I said to myself, why is this organization in Jerusalem that's run by Frum Group, why are the yeshivot, if we have Jewish values, not having their people down here a few hours a day volunteering? Why do they need Americans? And why do these organizations for wounded soldiers not get any governmental funding for PTSD, my friend from the 73 war who died for that? And why are Jewish values that I thought that, it doesn't say go and learn and then don't do to others. It says don't do to others what you wouldn't have to do to yourself and then go and learn. And I see all this and I have this anger that in a sense we are being enablers of behavior that is, I'd like to think is non-Jewish, but in fact is very Jewish by Frum organizations and people wearing kippot and others. And it's a combination of anger and deep fulfillment. So maybe you can help me resolve all that.
Okay, thank you. Hold on, Donniel will take a few and then
Okay, but you'll remind me?
I will remind you. I am on it. So I want to point to the 2 sides. Is there anyone on either of the sides rather than the center of the room with a question? Okay. Where? Okay. Natalie, if you see Gadi in the second to last row, I'm going to embarrass him a little bit. Gadi is one of our Hartman Teen Fellows. I've had the pleasure of working with the teen program, and I can see you blushing even from here, Gadi. I'm very sorry, but please, your question.
So I've done a good amount of work in talking about political polarization, and right when we talk about also the inability to have these conversations right now, it's sort of a hard question to ask, but like how do we hold these 2 values in tension, that these are the conversations that many are not able to engage in yet, and yet we're simultaneously pursuing something that may require us to push past that? And how do we...
Be a little more specific.
Well,
You're
I
being
mean...
suggestive, but be explicit.
about the war in Gaza.
I know,
About-
but tell me what
when we
you're
talk
talking
about like civilian casualties, or we talk about aid, or the day after, right? And people are not ready to engage in it, right? And that's understandable. And we're pursuing a just war, but in order to pursue it justly, how can we engage in those conversations in a way that people are ready for?
Yes, good.
Okay, and let's take one more. Natalie, anyone who's right over near you, just throw it up. We're not going to have a chance to hear everyone's question. I'll apologize in advance, but we will have some time afterward to chat.
Okay, so my question is really building on the first two questions. And it is, I think your metaphor is very beautiful. The two different covenants is a very lovely metaphor. But the reality is, in Israel, the population is half is angry with, each half is angry at the other, doesn't want to talk to the other, doesn't want to accept each other. In the United States, the Jewish community is riven in maybe more than 2 or 3 or 4 different parts. So my question for you is, what is the future of Israel and the Jewish people?
In 10 words or less.
Okay, let's...
Donniel, if you'll allow me, I'm going to try to bring the questions together.
You know what? You're boss tonight.
Okay.
You
Part
do
of
it.
what I'm hearing pulling all of these questions together is when we talk about ideas, it's very easy to talk about ideas being in tension, ideas pulling one to the other, side to side. When we're talking about people who hold very different views, it's not so easy. Tension becomes polarization.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to talk to you. How do we overcome that?
Like to the first representation of that question, never get angry for what it is that you do, because other people might be using it and manipulating it. You have to get up in the morning and ask yourself, who do I want to be? And you know why you went to Israel? We didn't need you to pick strawberries if you picked strawberries. Right? My wife, her whole workforce went for a whole day. Like 50 people picked strawberries for a day, and the farmer said, okay, that's what one Thai worker does. And he said, not only that, he doesn't eat half of what he picks. Do you know why you went to Israel? Because you were called. That's beautiful. Don't let anybody, the fact that somebody is doing, don't let anybody take that from you. You went because you wanted to be with your people. Because you're a Genesis Jew. And it wasn't that you weren't a hero. You weren't saving Israel. You were just being with them. And you know, and all of us know, that the beautiful thing is when, like in a family, it's like you're just there. That's family. You're just there with each other. Not when they need you, you're just there. And that is just an expression of a profound love and connection that you have. The fact that other people have distorted notions or accurate notions of Judaism but are different, just let them be. It has to be enough that you wake up in the morning and you are who it is that you have to be. And no one should be ever allowed to take that away from you. Don't give them that power. The power of being angry. The power of somehow feeling that I'm being manipulated and used. You're not. What you're doing is you're doing the right thing. You're just doing the right thing. The fact that other people, and here we come to, the fact that other people aren't, is on them. It's on them. And there's something very important in life about just doing the right thing when you know it and not letting anybody taint it or somehow make it less meaningful for you. And it's true. In Israel, there is a deep cultural war going on. It's not half-half, and we'll come to it's not half-half, but there is a deep cultural war. And we don't know how it's going to resolve itself. And part of our Genesis and Exodus obligations, and I said this again, at lunch, people want to help Israel. How do you say l'shakem in English again? Rehabilitate. You want to rehabilitate Israel, and you're right. We have to start with rehabilitating Nahal Oz and the kibbutzim and cities in the Gaza envelope. We have to be prepared to ask ourselves, what are our obligations to the citizens in the north, who frankly, no one has a clue yet how we're going to help them. And no one's talking to them honestly about the dangers and what it means to go home and whether they're ever going to have a home, whether every one of those cities or villages could actually go home. Because I don't know what safety means. So we need to rehabilitate. The amount of injured and traumatized, our numbers. See, now in Israel you have feelings, it's beautiful, but there's more people who are traumatized as a result. There's much more trauma in Israel. It's very prevalent. That's part of the rehabilitation. But a very big part of that rehabilitation, and that's my life's work, and I'm just part of the forces of good in Jewish life. I don't claim to be the most important, I'm that one, and it's what I'm good at, is that we're working on rehabilitating Israel's soul. How do we get back to a Genesis story that we don't know how to have room for right now? We don't know how to do it right now. And I would just challenge you to recognize that the story of lovers of Israel is going to require us to rehabilitate all of them. How do we get back to issues of morality and democracy and state and religion and Haredim and groups that aren't sharing and the groups ultra-nationalists and racists? And we, Ben Gurion dreamt of the day that Israel would have its own criminals. We have our own fascists. We do. We have bad people. We do. And they're in our government. And we have a deep cultural war. And how do we rehabilitate? And now we're going to come to your question. Rehabilitate this conversation that so many Israelis aren't yet comfortable having. And so at the end of the day, October 7th requires of you to rehabilitate the communities and the broken people. But April 8th, Israel of tomorrow, the Israel that's going to enable or determine whether your children or whether you want to have a relationship with Israel, is going to require a real rehabilitation of the soul, of its morality, of its principles, and of its Judaism. What is the story of Judaism that we're going to tell? You ignore that at profound danger, because without that rehabilitation, no matter what you do and no matter what public relations you have, the next generation of Jews, not to speak of the next generation of Americans, are going to be seriously challenged in their relationship to Israel. And rightfully so. And so we can make that difference. Now you ask, how do we do that? First of all, you do it humbly. You don't attack somebody. Nobody wants to be moralized. But they want to be inspired. But it is a very difficult time. What grade are you in? I don't know what that means. What? 10th grade. I have no clue. That's 10th grade. In a couple of years, you're going to go to university. And in university, what you're going to want is to be a part of a larger community who you want to engage with and talk with. That's what you're going to want to do in college. Otherwise, you'd stay home. You want to get away from your family. You want to get away from a certain environment, and it's going to be your first chance to explore the world in a relatively safe, environment. There's certain civility and rules and comforts, and you want to be intellectually challenged, and you're going to want to talk to people. And you might meet some people who are just anti-Semitic, but you're not going to meet a lot of them because you're going to walk away from them. But you're going to have, God willing, tens and tens of friends who aren't anti-Semitic. You know it. They're not anti-Semitic. But they don't understand what Israel's doing. Our responsibility is not simply to make a case for Israel, but for Israel to change so that it can make the case for itself. Public relations is intimately connected to policy. Public relations is not how you spin a distorted reality. It's how you communicate a policy. Now, it's true, it's hard. Now, the one method, I have a methodology, and I've been trying it for 10, 15 years, and I still don't know if it's successful. You're now in a program which we're using it. Our methodology is that when there are Jews who ask moral questions, those who are watching Israel have greater ease identifying with Israel when the Jews they meet are ones who either, when they ask questions, either call them anti-Semites or say, "You don't get it." You know the term, "you don't get it"? Get rid of it. You don't get it. It assumes that there's certainty. No. That it's right. It's hard. And then in Israel, there's not going to be all of Israel, but you're going to have allies in Israel. So, listen, my bracha to you is that when you go to college, Netanyahu will not be the Prime Minister of Israel. That's my bracha to you. And that will make it much easier. Because he's lost all moral credibility. Unfortunately, he has. He didn't lose it beforehand. I never liked him. I never voted for him, but I had a profound respect for him. I did. I think he's lost all credibility. But in Israel that strives to be something, even if it's not perfect, but in Israel that admits what its Exodus obligations are, even if it fails, even if it doesn't live up to all of them, is an Israel that you could talk to. So Israel, unfortunately, bombed and killed 7 food aid workers. Within 5 minutes, the Prime Minister of Israel should have been on television, not announcing. The Prime Minister of Israel should have got up and said, "I am devastated. I'm devastated. In the fog of war, human beings make mistakes, and we made a terrible mistake. And I promise you we are going to learn, and we're going to find out what happened, and we're going to correct it, because I want to tell you, these aid workers, you are a great service to us as a people. We need you. We have a war against Hamas. We do not have a war against the Palestinian people. And I share in this tragedy. And I promise to you, and I promise to the world, that we are working to correct this mistake. The conversation would have been completely different. Our Prime Minister he came out with a press release. So the question, it's hard, but it's embracing it. Of course life is not, the fact that you embrace it is what's going to enable you to have a relationship with Israel, because you're going to be fighting for the Israel that you want and not necessarily having to wave a flag at Israel as it is. And you will be creating an environment where people could say, yeah, Israel, like every country, is flawed. But there's good people. What's your first name? Gabi? Gadi. But I know Gadi, he's a good guy. Gadi's a character witness. This is a country still built. That is a completely different conversation. And by the way, that conversation is completely foreign to most Israel advocacy. Israel advocacy is about you telling everyone who has a question why they're wrong. And when they don't accept that they're wrong, you say the reason they're not accepting it is that they're anti-Semitic. And it's the opposite. And when you embrace that complexity, then we live, and it's true. And by the way, in Israel, there'll be people who don't have any clue, and your job will be to find your allies and to say, that's the Israel that I'm working on. It's about being part of a journey. And to the last, the vast majority of Israelis are decent people. It's not 50-50. It's closer to 75-25. Bad politicians create a coalition between the moral right wing and the immoral right wing. And very often it corrupts the moral right wing. And you think that it's larger than it is. There is a large, very significant base in Israel that, at least in theory, cares about human life, cares about human rights, cares about being responsible, and wants to live with each other despite our differences. There was, before October 7th, a 70-seat coalition from across the spectrum of center, left, and right who wanted to work with each other. By the way, every single Israeli poll proves today that that 70-seat coalition is still there, and it's even growing stronger. Now, it's true. There are people who, for political reasons, and it's something that you're familiar with, believe that they're going to increase their support for their team by delegitimizing the other team and by fostering greater animosity and hatred. That's a violation of Genesis Judaism. Most Jews in Israel, that's not their game. And on October 7th, you saw it. On October 7th, the country, we used the category, we're under the stretcher. Everybody, in whatever way they could. And they didn't ask what your politics were. And by the way, same thing with our soldiers in Gaza. Same thing. They're trying to serve their people, and they're setting aside some of their disagreements. Now, it's true. These disagreements are resurfacing. And they're resurfacing because there's great uncertainty. If there was a new election now in Israel, there would be a great unifying force. The great hatred and the animosity is going to come as a result of the frustration of the fact that there's a feeling of large numbers of people that this government needs to go, but legally they don't have to go. They have every right to stay and live out their mandate for another 2.5 years. They have every right to do so. So it's going to be a hard time, but part of our challenge, and this is part of what it's a big part of what I teach, and what I'm trying to build a coalition of the decent people in Israel. I'm trying to build a coalition of decency. And I'm finding that a very large majority of Israeli Jews want to be under that coalition. And our job is to magnify them. Genesis Judaism is alive and well in Israel. But it's true, like at different points in history, just like here in America, Exodus consciousness could override your Genesis consciousness. It could say, who are the Jews that I really care about? Are those who agree with me. That's when Exodus becomes distorted. And so our responsibility is to create an Exodus narrative that a large number of Genesis Jews could embrace. And here too, it's going to require something of us. And with this, I'll conclude. Good people, smart people, decent people, moral people could share values and still disagree on policy. Just remember that. And when you remember that, you can reach across divides. And the divisions don't have to be divisions of morality and decency, but legitimate disagreements in the spirit of these and these are the words of the living God as to how you implement them. And so, but that's a different coalition than the coalition we have now. And it's going to take time to build it. So, you know, as I said beforehand, and as I'm saying over and again, it's not going to be an easy time. It's not going to be an easy time. For me, you know, you don't like Genesis, you don't like Exodus, okay, I don't care. Like, I wrote a book, I love the book, but I don't care about it. I don't care, it's just about it's a thought. If it works, if it teaches you, good. If it helps you, God bless you. You know, I don't care. I really don't. I can't stand authors who think that their books are messianic. It's just uninteresting to me. You're just an idea. But hold those two together. And then we have the beginning of a new coalition in Israel, but also a new coalition in North American Jewry. And our people need that coalition. And inshallah, we'll have the strength and the wisdom to build it together. Thank you all very, very much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ari Berkowitz. I'm the director of Chicago for the Shalom Hartman Institute. First of all, I just want to say thank you to Donniel and for Claire for being here. Your courageous leadership, your thoughtful conversation and words really pushes us and challenges us, I think, in the best way. And so first, just thank you. Thank you again for being here. I also want to thank one more time our partners to make this happen, Lonnie and JUF, and Rabbi Cohen and Temple Jeremiah. Thank you for hosting us and welcoming us and being partners and really true partners in this. And I want to also thank the Temple Jeremiah staff and my colleague Natalie Debo for making this all happen. So a round of applause for you. And I'll just share a couple quick things. First of all, Claire is our editor-in-chief for the Shalom Hartman Sources Journal, and we've just released our spring 2024 edition. So I encourage everyone to go to the Shalom Hartman website to find that new edition. You can find it virtually there and also available to order. And I know all of you already listen to the For Heaven's Sake podcast, but in case there's someone out here that doesn't, I highly encourage you to listen to it and listen to it religiously. One last quick announcement is just, again, I want to just highlight Gotti over there, one of our teen fellows, and really incredible that you're here, and thank you for asking a question. And we've just actually opened up our applications for next year's Teen Fellowship. So if you know of bright, intelligent, thoughtful 10th through 12th graders, I highly encourage you to encourage them to participate and to apply. It's a really wonderful program, and it's a great opportunity that we have in our community to connect both our Chicago teens to the broader Jewish community and also to the Hartman learning. And I know that, Donniel, you said that Genesis covenant doesn't have bad Jews and good Jews, but I think we all know that bad Jews don't feed Jews when we gather together. So I want to invite everyone to have a bite to eat and continue schmoozing out in the hallway, and thank you again for being here.